Top 1. Greek Fire. The year is 678. You are standing on the seawall of Constantinople, watching the largest Arab fleet ever assembled move across the Bosphorus. 700 ships. The math is simple and brutal. The city falls tonight. Every defensive calculation says so. And then the Byzantine vessels open their bronze tubes, and the water catches fire. Not the ships, the water itself. The Arab fleet burns at the waterline, and the city that was supposed to fall survives for another 700 years. The weapon that saved it is called Greek fire, and the formula died with the empire that built it. Here is what we know. The weapon was invented around 670 CE by a man named Callinicos, a refugee engineer from the Syrian city of Heliopolis, who brought his knowledge to Constantinople and placed it in the hands of Emperor Constantine IV. It worked spectacularly and repeatedly across more than 4 centuries of documented naval warfare. The Byzantine historian Theophanes the Confessor, writing around 815 CE, describes the first deployment at Cyzicus with the precision of a man who understood what he was recording. The Arab fleet, he notes, was not just defeated, it was annihilated. Anna Komnene, writing her biography of her father, Emperor Alexios, in approximately 1148 CE, describes the fire in terms that still make modern chemists stop and read again. It flows, she says, along the surface of the sea. Water does not stop it. The only substances known to slow it are sand, strong vinegar, and old urine. The delivery system was a pressurized bronze siphon mounted on the bows of Byzantine Dromon warships, which projected the burning liquid in a continuous stream. Emperor Leo VI, in his military manual, Tactica, written around 900 CE, confirms the siphon mechanism and specifies that the fire could be thrown by hand in clay grenades as well as projected from ships. At the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717 to 718 CE, Emperor Leo III deployed the weapon against an Arab fleet that, according to the chronicler Theophanes, numbered 1,800 vessels. The fire, Theophanes records, destroyed approximately 800 of them. We have the numbers, we have the dates, we have the named witnesses. What we do not have is any idea how it actually worked. Modern chemistry has spent centuries on this problem. The leading proposals include combinations of naphtha, quicklime, pine resin, and possibly calcium phosphide, a compound that ignites spontaneously on contact with water. John Haldon and Brian Rollo, whose 2006 analysis in Greek, Roman, and Byzantine studies remains the most thorough modern treatment of the question, concluded that no single known formula simultaneously produces all the described properties. Something in the combination burned on water, could not be extinguished by water, and flowed under its own momentum across the surface of the sea. No modern reconstruction has achieved this, not convincingly, not in controlled conditions, and not after centuries of trying. Emperor Constantine VII, writing in his administrative manual De Administrando Imperio around 950 CE, is explicit about the suppression protocol. The formula, he writes, was revealed by God to Constantine the Great. It must never be given to any foreign nation. Revealing it is a sin against God and an act of treason against the empire in the same breath. This is not the language of protecting a trade secret. This is the language of a man who believes he is guarding something that was never meant to exist in the first place. The mainstream explanation is simple and logical. Greek fire was a petroleum naphtha compound, sophisticated for its era, but comprehensible in principle. The formula was lost because state secrets kept by a single family die with that family. Constantinople fell, the Callinicos lineage ended, and entropy did the rest. That explanation is probably right, but it is also somehow not enough. You don't deploy a compound industrially at scale across 4 centuries of naval warfare and lose not just the formula, but every practical trace of how it behaved. You don't lose gunpowder after 400 years of manufacturing it. You lose something far stranger, something that perhaps worked for reasons that even the people using it could not fully articulate. What if the Byzantines understood the protocol without understanding the physics? What if Callinicos brought a formula whose mechanism he had inherited rather than derived, passed down from somewhere older, And the empire that deployed it was operating, in the most literal sense, on faith. Constantine VII believed God gave it to them. That belief, that the weapon was divine rather than engineered, may be exactly the kind of thinking that ensured no one ever wrote down why it worked. You don't dissect a miracle, you just make sure no one else gets one. The last confirmed use of Greek fire in naval combat was at the Siege of Acre in 1291 CE. After that, silence. The formula that burned water for 400 years vanished as completely as if it had never existed. And somewhere in that vanishing is the shape of a decision. Not entropy, but policy, not accident, but erasure. Top 2, the Brahmastra. From the water of the Bosphorus, we move to the plains of northern India, to a battlefield so old it still carries the name of the catastrophe fought on it, and to a weapon described with such specific clinical detail that when the man who oversaw the first nuclear test in history was asked whether it was the first such explosion ever, he paused before answering and said, "In modern times." The plains of Kurukshetra stretch flat and dust-colored across 48 square kilometers of what is now the Indian state of Haryana. Armies have fought here across 3,000 years of documented history, but the battle that gives the site its sacred weight belongs to a much older story, a war described in the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, composed across centuries between approximately 400 BCE and 400 CE, drawing on oral traditions that some scholars trace back to 1500 BCE or beyond. Embedded in that text across more than 14 separate passages is a description of a weapon that Hindu military scholars call the Brahmastra. Modern readers call it something else. The Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra as a single projectile. The Sanskrit word used, astra, specifically denotes a self-propelled weapon, not something thrown, charged with the power of the universe and capable of destroying the world in a single deployment. That's poetic. Ancient epics are full of world-ending weapons. Mythology uses hyperbole the way the ocean uses water. But then the text gets specific, and specificity is where mythology stops behaving like mythology. The aftermath of a Brahmastra deployment, as described across multiple books of the Mahabharata, includes the following. Corpses so completely incinerated they cannot be identified. A flash of light followed by a pressure wave. Hair and nails falling from the bodies of survivors. Pottery shattering without physical impact. Birds turning white. Food and water in the affected region becoming poisonous for generations. And children born in the years following the event arriving with defects that their parents did not carry. That is not a description of any natural disaster available to ancient Indian civilization. No volcano produces that symptom cluster. No flood does, and no conventional fire. The only mechanism known to modern science that produces all of those documented effects in combination, the flash, the pressure wave, the radiation sickness, the multi-generational birth defects, and the soil and water contamination, is a nuclear detonation in its radiological aftermath. These symptoms were first clinically documented and published following Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The Mahabharata was written between 1500 and 2000 years earlier. Robert Oppenheimer, the director of the Manhattan Project, was present at the Trinity test in the New Mexico desert on July 16, 1945, the first nuclear detonation in what the official record calls history. When a student asked him afterward whether Trinity was the first nuclear explosion ever set off, his documented answer was, in modern times. He did not say yes. He had the Bhagavad Gita, embedded in the Mahabharata, committed to memory. He quoted it at Trinity. The words he chose were, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." A man who had just built the atomic bomb reached for a 3,000-year-old Sanskrit text to describe what he had done. The Mohenjo-Daro site in modern Pakistan, inhabited between approximately 2600 and 1900 BCE, sits in the Indus Valley. In its upper archaeological layer, the layer closest to the civilization's sudden, still unexplained collapse, researchers have found a stratum of street fragments that have been vitrified, fused into glass by extreme heat. This is the same process that produces trinitite, the green glass formed at nuclear test sites when sand is subjected to temperatures above 1100 Kelvin. Researcher David Davenport published his analysis of this layer in 1979, noting additionally that skeletal remains in the area show evidence of sudden, simultaneous death, with bodies collapsed in the street in postures consistent with a pressure wave rather than conventional violence. No weapons, no defensive wounds, just people who stopped mid-movement all at once. The mainstream position, argued by scholars including Wendy Doniger at the University of Chicago, is firm and reasonable. The Brahmastra is a literary device. Ancient peoples used natural catastrophes, lightning, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, as the model for divine weapons. Hyperbolic military language is universal in epic poetry. The Mahabharata is a poem, not a technical document, and reading it as a weapons manual is a category error. The vitrified layer at Mohenjo-Daro has conventional geological explanations. The symptom list in the text is a coincidence, the kind of pattern matching that the human mind imposes on ancient literature when we carry modern knowledge into ancient reading rooms. But the specificity of the symptom list is the detail that analogy cannot quite reach. Ancient epic poetry describes heroes tall as mountains and arrows that split the sun. That is hyperbole. Listing hair loss, pustular skin lesions, water contamination, and hereditary birth defects in survivors is not hyperbole. That is a sequence, a progression, a document of consequences observed in a particular order. Those consequences were not observed in any natural event available to the ancient world. They had to come from somewhere. The question, and it is only a question, not a conclusion, is whether the people who eventually wrote them down were preserving a memory of something real, wrapped in the only narrative framework available to them, and whether the rulers who came after them understood exactly what that memory contained and made sure it never appeared in plain language again. The Mahabharata encodes it in Scripture, and Scripture is the one vault that no conqueror has ever successfully burned all the way to the ground. Top 3. The Ark of the Covenant. From the ancient plains of India, we cross the Sinai to the banks of the Jordan, to a weapon described with such precise engineering specifications that a modern electrical engineer reading the original text recognized the blueprint before the theologians did. The Ark of the Covenant. Imagine reading an ancient text and finding the following construction specifications: a rectangular box 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits tall, approximately 131 x 79 x 79 centimeter, built of acacia wood overlaid with gold on both the interior and exterior surfaces, creating a gold layer, a wood layer, and a gold layer. This three-layer sandwich was topped with a lid of pure gold with two gold figures mounted facing each other at either end. It was transported only on wooden poles, never touched directly, and kept in a sealed room that only one priest could enter once a year. According to multiple independent textual accounts, it was capable of killing anyone who touched it without authorization, producing visible light from the space between the two gold figures, and generating what the text describes as fire from heaven on at least two separate occasions. The construction specifications are in Exodus chapters 25 through 27. The killing mechanism is documented in 2 Samuel 6. The fire events are in Leviticus 10 and Numbers 16. Theologians call this divine power. Electrical engineers call it a capacitor. A capacitor stores electrical charge through a specific structural configuration, a conductive material separated from another conductive material by an insulating layer. Gold separated from gold by acacia wood, which is a natural electrical insulator, creates exactly this configuration. The ark's construction creates a double-layer capacitor. In the extremely dry air of the Sinai Desert, where the ark was built and first deployed, atmospheric electrical charge accumulates rapidly and dissipates slowly. A gold-plated wooden box carried across an electrically charged desert landscape, sealed from conductive contact with the ground, would accumulate and store a significant electrostatic charge. Touch it with your bare hand, and you would complete the circuit instantly. The death of Uzzah is recorded in 2 Samuel 6. He reaches out to steady the ark when the ox cart transporting it stumbles. He touches it, and he dies. The text says God struck him down for irreverence. The electrical model says he grounded a capacitor. Both accounts describe the same event. They simply disagree about the mechanism. Samuel records the death with the blunt precision of a report, not the elaboration of a legend. It happened. A man touched a box and died. The question is, what was in the box? The transport protocols in the Book of Numbers are striking when read as engineering specifications rather than religious ritual. Numbers 4.5-6 requires priests to wrap the ark in badger skin before it is moved, a material with documented insulating properties. The ark must be carried on wooden poles, never set directly on the ground, never touched by metal, and never placed in contact with any conductive surface during transit. These are not random purity laws. These are the operational safety procedures for a high-voltage device. The insulation protocol makes no theological sense. God does not need a leather cover to protect himself, but it makes complete electrical sense. Egyptian archaeologist and researcher Gerald Massey documented that the ark's design closely mirrors the sacred bark of Amun, the portable shrine used in Egyptian temple ritual, also gold-plated, also carried on poles, and also restricted to a small number of authorized handlers. The parallel suggests not coincidence, but a shared technical tradition, something that passed from Egyptian temple engineering into Israelite construction around the period of the Exodus. The mainstream position, articulated by biblical scholars, including Richard Elliott Friedman, is straightforward. The ark is a cultic object, a sacred container for the tablets of the covenant, central to Israelite religious identity. The deaths associated with it are divine punishment for ritual transgression. The construction specifications reflect the aesthetic conventions of ancient Near Eastern sacred furniture. Its disappearance after Babylon sacked Jerusalem in 586 BCE is explained by looting or deliberate concealment before the siege, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's claim that the ark resides today in a chapel in Aksum, guarded by a single monk who never leaves the compound, is a matter of faith, not archaeology. But the insulation protocol remains, and protocols exist to manage real hazards, not theological abstractions. If the danger was spiritual, cloth would be irrelevant. Spirits pass through badger skin without difficulty. If the danger was physical, cloth would be exactly the right response. The priests wrapping the ark in leather before transit were following an engineering safety procedure. They may not have known why. They may not have used the word capacitor or electrostatics or discharge. They had a different word. They called it the wrath of God, and they were very careful about not getting too close to it. The ark disappears from the historical record in 586 BCE. Whatever it was, a sacred box, a divine instrument, or something that an Egyptian engineer understood differently than a Jerusalem theologian, it has not been seen by anyone who survived to tell a credible account since. The most dangerous objects rarely are. Top 4, Archimedes' heat ray. From the sealed room of Jerusalem's inner temple, we travel west and north to the harbor of a Sicilian city, to a weapon we know by the name of its maker, and to the single most instructive act of deliberate military erasure in the classical world, Archimedes' heat ray. The year is 212 BCE. The Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcellus has the city of Syracuse, on the eastern coast of Sicily, surrounded by land and sea. His fleet is anchored in the harbor. His infantry holds the perimeter. By every military calculation available to him, the city should have fallen weeks ago. Instead, his soldiers are terrified of a 75-year-old mathematician. This is the documented historical record, not legend. Plutarch, writing 3 centuries later in his Life of Marcellus, states that Roman soldiers would flee if they saw so much as a rope or a stick of timber projecting over the city walls, convinced that Archimedes had devised some new device to destroy them. Marcellus himself, Plutarch records, responded to his own soldiers' panic with a joke. He said he was being beaten in a geometry war by one of Archimedes' many armed machines. It is one of the few moments in Roman military history where a commanding general made a joke about his own defeat. He was losing, and he knew it, and the thing that was beating him was a brain. Among the weapons Archimedes deployed during the 2-year siege of Syracuse, ancient sources describe a system of polished bronze mirrors used to focus sunlight onto Roman ships at a distance, igniting them without physical contact. The primary sources for this are the 2nd century CE historian Lucian, the Byzantine compiler John Tzetzes, writing in the 12th century, and Anthemius of Tralles, himself a mathematician and engineer, writing around 500 CE. Tzetzes specifies the range as a bowshot, approximately 150 to 200 meters. Lucian describes the ships as bursting into flame. The mathematical knowledge required to design a functional parabolic mirror system was demonstrably within Archimedes' capabilities. His surviving works on the measurement of a circle, on floating bodies, and the method of mechanical theorems establish a command of geometry that makes the mirror system not merely plausible, but by his standards, relatively straightforward. If he could calculate the displacement of irregular solids while getting out of a bath, he could calculate a focal point. Modern attempts to replicate the device have produced contested results. In 1973, Greek engineer Ioannis Sakis assembled 70 Greek sailors, each holding a bronze-coated mirror approximately 1.5 by 1 meter. Directed onto a replica Roman vessel at 50 meters, the mirrors ignited the wood in roughly 3 minutes. The test was conducted for the Greek Navy. In 2005, MIT students working under Dr. David Wallace used 127 one-foot square mirror tiles focused on a replica ship hull at 30 meters. The wood reached ignition temperature but required approximately 10 minutes of sustained focus. A result the team described as plausible but tactically problematic, since an enemy ship would not hold still for 10 minutes. The television program Mythbusters tested the same hypothesis twice in 2004 and 2010 and declared it a myth, but conducted both tests in San Francisco at a solar intensity significantly lower than Syracuse's Mediterranean summer, a methodological detail that several physicists noted publicly at the time. The historical suppression is not hypothetical, it is documented. Marcellus wanted Archimedes alive. He issued that order explicitly before the final assault. When a Roman soldier killed Archimedes during the sack of the city, apparently because Archimedes refused to leave a geometric diagram he was working on, Marcellus was reportedly furious and arranged a funeral monument for his enemy. That is not normal Roman behavior toward the chief engineer of a defeated enemy city. Marcellus understood exactly what he had failed to capture. He took the mechanical orrery, Archimedes' working model of planetary motion, back to Rome as a trophy. There is no record of the mirror apparatus being transported. It was either destroyed or its existence was quietly ended. None of Archimedes' surviving works, preserved largely through Arab scholars in the centuries after Rome, contain any reference to the mirror weapon. The most prolific mathematical documentarian of the ancient world wrote meticulous treatises on levers, pulleys, hydrostatics, and the geometry of spheres. He wrote nothing about focusing bronze mirrors to burn ships. A man who documented everything left no trace of the thing he built that Rome was most afraid of. The mainstream position is that the heat ray is ancient mythology inflated by centuries of retelling. The Mythbusters result, many historians argue, is the realistic one. Marcellus grieved Archimedes because he admired genius, not because a targeting array was lost. The absence of technical documentation simply reflects the absence of the weapon itself. But Plutarch does not describe a general mourning a mathematician in the abstract. He describes a soldier being killed for interrupting a geometry problem. Whatever Archimedes was working on in those final hours, he thought it was more important than his own survival. That is either the portrait of pure mathematical obsession, or it is the portrait of a man who understood that the diagram he was drawing was something the Romans could not be allowed to take. Top 5. The Qin Emperor's Mercury Weapon. From the harbor of Syracuse, we move east by centuries and thousands of kilometers to the largest construction project in human history, and to a weapon so patient that it is still active after 2,000 years. The Qin Emperor's Mercury Weapon. The mound at Mount Li in Shanxi Province, China, is 76 meters tall and covers an area of 56 square kilometers. From the air, it looks like a natural hill. It is not. It is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China in 221 BCE, built the Great Wall, standardized the written language, unified the currency, and became, in the process, the most powerful individual in the history of the ancient world. He was also, by the end of his life, terrified of death in a way that made him dangerous to everyone around him. He sent fleets across the Pacific looking for islands where immortality grew on trees. He consumed cinnabar pills given to him by court alchemists who told him mercury was the elixir of eternal life. He died at 49, almost certainly of mercury poisoning, his body preserved in mercury salts during the return journey to the capital, so that the smell of his decomposition would not alert the court to his death before his succession was secured. The substance he believed would make him immortal was the same substance that killed him. And it is the same substance that 2,100 years later makes it impossible to safely excavate his tomb. Sima Qian, China's greatest historian, described the tomb in his Records of the Grand Historian, written approximately 100 BCE, about a century after the tomb's construction. His account includes a detail that historians filed under poetic embellishment for most of the last 2,000 years. The interior of the tomb, Sima Qian writes, contains a representation of all the rivers and seas of the empire, rendered in flowing mercury, mechanically circulated by an automated system to simulate the movement of water. 100 tons of liquid mercury flowing underground in the dark. In 2016, a geophysical survey conducted by teams from the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology used soil conductivity sensors and spectrographic analysis of surface materials to examine the ground above the unexcavated inner burial mound. They found mercury. Specifically, they found mercury concentrations in the soil directly above the inner tomb that were significantly elevated above background levels, distributed in a pattern consistent with pooled liquid across a large underground area. Sima Qian, writing from second-hand accounts a century after the tomb was sealed, described the interior with accuracy that 21st century instruments have now confirmed. Someone told him the truth, and then whoever that someone was, along with everyone else who knew the details of the interior, was sealed inside. The sealing of the workers is not legend, it is documented. Sima Qian records explicitly that after the emperor's body was placed in the tomb and the inner chambers were sealed, the artisans and engineers who had knowledge of the interior were locked inside. The outer passage was closed. They died there. Skeletal remains consistent with live entombment have been found in the outer chambers. The most capable engineers of the world's most advanced civilization at that moment were rendered permanently silent, not after they have finished the job, but because they finished it. The passive weapon logic is not speculative. Liquid mercury at scale produces mercury vapor. A sealed underground space flooded with 100 tons of liquid mercury would maintain vapor concentrations lethal to any human being within minutes of breaching the sealed entrance. This is not a trap that requires resetting. It does not run out of ammunition. It does not require maintenance. It is a weapon that becomes more complete over time as the mercury redistributes into cracks and chambers, creating an expanding lethal zone around the burial site. Chinese archaeologist Yuan Zhongyi has stated publicly that the mercury concentration makes safe excavation of the inner tomb impossible with existing technology. The weapon is still working. The mainstream interpretation is cultural and symbolic. Mercury represented the rivers and seas of China, the empire the emperor claimed dominion over in death. The workers were sealed inside for security reasons consistent with elite burial practice across the ancient world. The tomb is protected by Chinese law and cultural heritage policy, not by institutional concealment of its engineering. And they are almost certainly correct. The symbolic reading of the mercury is coherent, and elite burial secrecy is universal. But you do not use 100 tons of the most toxic liquid on Earth to represent water. You use paint, you use blue tile, you use lapis lazuli, which the Qin court had access to through Silk Road trade. The decision to use real mercury in real quantities, creating a real lethal environment, is an engineering decision. Someone calculated that mass. Someone sourced it from the mercury mines of Hunan and Guizhou, which archaeological records confirm were in operation during the Qin period. Someone designed the mechanical circulation system, and then someone made absolutely certain that every person who could describe any of those calculations was in the ground before the outer doors were closed. Top 8. The Persian Poison Blade Archive. From the hills of Laconia, we travel east to a city that burned, and to the one archive that a man who preserved everything else chose not to open. The Persian Poison Blade Archive. The burning of Persepolis in 330 BCE is one of the most thoroughly documented acts of deliberate destruction in the ancient world. Diodorus Siculus, Plutarch, Quintus Curtius Rufus, and Arrian all record it. The Achaemenid capital, at that moment the wealthiest city on earth, was burned by Alexander of Macedon following his defeat of Darius III and the formal end of the Persian Empire as an independent state. The fire lasted for days. The cedar columns, the hanging gardens, and the treasury that had accumulated the wealth of 100 conquered nations, all of it went up. The standard explanation, preserved in Diodorus and Plutarch, is that Alexander's companion, Thais, persuaded him to burn it as revenge for the Persian burning of Athens in 480 BCE. A drunk decision at a victory party. History turning on a woman's speech and a lit torch. Arrian, considered by most classical historians the most reliable of Alexander's ancient biographers because he worked from the primary accounts of eyewitnesses, does not include the Thais story. He records Alexander giving the order deliberately, sober, and in the context of a strategic decision. These are two very different accounts of the same fire. One says impulse, one says policy. Alexander preserved everything else. This is the crucial context. He kept the Persian administrative system intact, retained Persian governors in their posts, adopted Persian court dress, married Persian noblewomen in a mass ceremony at Susa, and funded the translation of Persian astronomical and mathematical texts into Greek, documents that eventually found their way into the Library of Alexandria. He was the most systematic appropriator of conquered knowledge in the ancient world. When he found the tomb of Cyrus the Great desecrated, he ordered it restored and had the desecrators punished. He understood that the Persian Empire's administrative sophistication was something he needed to govern what he had taken. The Greek physician Ctesias of Cnidus served as personal physician to King Artaxerxes II and had direct access to the Persian royal court from approximately 415 to 398 BCE. His work, Persica, surviving only in fragments quoted by later authors, describes a dedicated Persian court facility that scholars translate as the Poison Armory, a state-maintained installation under the supervision of the royal apothecary, producing and cataloging chemical agents for military application. Diodorus Siculus, in Book 17 of his Library of History, references Persian technical records held in the Persepolis treasury alongside the financial accounts of the empire. The financial accounts were inventoried before the fire. The technical records were not transported to Alexandria. They are not referenced in any catalog of the library's holdings. What the Persian arsenal actually contained can be partially reconstructed from battlefield accounts. Arsenic trisulfide, orpiment, and arsenic trioxide were both extracted from mines in the Persian sphere of influence, documented in Persian metallurgical records, and both produced delayed infection patterns in wounds that ancient military surgeons describe across multiple sources as corrupt beyond healing. The specific wound pathology they describe, a wound that appears minor, then deepens and spreads over 3 to 7 days, regardless of conventional treatment, is consistent with what modern medical toxicology identifies as arsenic interference with cellular wound repair mechanisms. This is not poison that kills quickly and obviously. This is poison that wins battles 2 weeks after they end, when the surgeons run out of answers. The mainstream historical position, stated clearly by Robin Lane Fox, is that the burning of Persepolis was a political act of finality, the symbolic destruction of Persian imperial power, and that whatever was lost in the fire was incidental to that symbolic purpose. There was no specific weapons archive. The fire was general. Loss of knowledge is a byproduct of conquest, not the goal. But Alexander did not burn libraries. That is the thing. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, which did not happen in a single event and was not ordered by any one conqueror, is a later story. Alexander specifically did not do that. He funded preservation. He employed scholars. The one archive from which no document was cataloged, no translation commissioned, and no scholar dispatched, the one set of Persian technical records that simply vanished under a fire that Alexander ordered, happened to be the records documenting what the Persian state had learned about making wounds that would not close. Whether that omission was deliberate or incidental, the effect is identical. The knowledge was there, and then it was not. Top 9. Hannibal's Serpent Bombs. From the ash layer of Persepolis, we travel west across the Mediterranean to a harbor on the coast of what is now southern Turkey, where the most creative military mind of the Carthaginian tradition did something that the entire subsequent history of warfare looked at, and then, seemingly by consensus, decided never to discuss again: Hannibal's serpent bombs. Hannibal Barca is 63 years old when the Battle of the Eurymedon River is fought in 184 BCE. He has been in exile for nearly 20 years, hunted by Rome across the eastern Mediterranean, bouncing between the courts of kings who want his tactical genius and fear the Roman diplomatic pressure that follows him everywhere. He is commanding a fleet for King Prusias of Bithynia, a minor kingdom on the southern coast of what is now Turkey, against the fleet of Eumenes II of Pergamon, a Roman ally and therefore for Hannibal, a stand-in for Rome itself. He is outnumbered, his ships are slower, and his crews are less experienced. Hannibal has spent his entire military career being outnumbered and less equipped in winning anyway. He looks at what he has. He looks at the shoreline. He orders his sailors to collect snakes, as many as they can find, as many species as they can catch. He has the snakes sealed into clay pots, one species per pot, and he holds a tactical briefing that must have been one of the stranger military planning sessions in the ancient world. The engagement is documented by Cornelius Nepos in his De Viris Illustribus, his compendium of distinguished men written approximately 35 BCE, about 150 years after the battle. Nepos is our primary ancient source for this event in any detail, and he is, as ancient historians go, reliable and precise. He names the commanders, he names the kingdom, he specifies the pot material, and he describes the tactical sequence in enough detail to reconstruct the engagement. Hannibal, Nepos records, signaled his captains to concentrate the serpent pots specifically on the flagship of Eumenes, correctly identifying that disabling the command ship would cascade into fleet-wide confusion. The pots were catapulted. They landed on the enemy decks and shattered. The snakes came out. The Pergamene fleet panicked. Bithynia won a battle it should have lost. Nepos describes the snakes as serpents of many kinds, anguis plurimi generis. Many kinds, not a specific species, not a name. For a writer who has just told us the name of the enemy king, the name of the river, the political context, and the tactical logic, the omission of the snake species is not casual. It is the single missing piece in an otherwise complete account. Ancient naturalists named everything. Pliny the Elder's Natural History, written approximately 100 CE, catalogs hundreds of snake species with their Latin names, geographic ranges, venom profiles, and behaviors. The intellectual culture that produced Nepos did not lack the vocabulary or the interest to name a snake. Someone decided not to. The region of Pamphylia, where the battle was fought, is home to at least 12 species of venomous snake, including the Levantine viper and the Ottoman viper, both of which produce hemotoxic venom causing extreme pain, tissue destruction, and death in untreated cases, and both of which would survive sealed in clay pots long enough for the duration of a naval engagement. The tactical logic of the weapon system is elegant in the specific. A clay pot is porous enough to allow air exchange to keep the contents alive in transit. It is sturdy enough to survive catapult launch without shattering prematurely, and it is brittle enough to shatter on impact with a wooden deck and release the contents immediately. This is a precision-engineered delivery mechanism. It did not happen on impulse. Someone tested it first. No ancient military manual includes this weapon. Not Vegetius, whose Epitoma Rei Militaris is the most comprehensive surviving manual of Roman military doctrine. Not Frontinus, whose Strategomata catalogs hundreds of tactical innovations from the ancient world. Not Aelian's Tacticae, in a body of military literature that records catapult specifications, siege tower design, cavalry formation geometry, and the tactical use of war elephants. The serpent bomb, a weapon that demonstrably won a naval battle, appears precisely once in a biography and never again. That is not the pattern of a forgotten technique. That is the pattern of an excluded one. Hannibal committed suicide shortly after this battle, swallowing poison he had kept in a ring for years, specifically to avoid being taken alive by Rome. The one man who understood the full operational logic of the weapon, which species performed best, which pots held up longest, and how to sort and handle live venomous snakes at military scale without losing half your crew in the process, died before anyone could ask him. He took the name of the snake with him, and in 2,200 years, no scholar has recovered it. Top 10. The Vajra and the Thunder Weapon. From the harbor at Eurymedon, we cross every ocean and every century at once to arrive at a mystery that does not belong to any single civilization, because the final weapon on this list was not invented by Carthage, or Persia, or Sparta, or Rome. According to the evidence, it was inherited by all of them from something much older and much harder to explain. The Rig Veda, the oldest surviving literature of the Sanskrit tradition, was composed between approximately 1500 and 1200 BCE, but draws on oral sources potentially thousands of years older. In it, there is a weapon called the Vajra. It is the primary weapon of Indra, king of the Vedic gods. The Rig Veda describes it across more than 250 separate hymns, more textual attention than any other single object in the entire corpus. It is made of metal. The Sanskrit word is ayas, denoting a hard-worked material. It is shaped like a double-headed scepter or wheel. It generates light as well as force. It cannot be resisted by any conventional material. It strikes at a distance, and it always returns to Indra's hand after being thrown. It was forged, not found. It has a manufacturer. The text describes it as built from the bones of the sage Dadichi, which is mythological language. But it is manufacturing language. Someone made it. It did not fall from the sky. In Scandinavia, the Prose Edda of Snorri Sturluson, compiled around 1220 CE from Norse oral traditions dating to at least 700 CE and probably much earlier, describes a weapon called Mjolnir. It belongs to Thor. It is made by the dwarves Sindri and Brokkr in an underground forge. Again, manufactured, not natural. It is short-handled due to a production error during manufacturing, which is the kind of specific, almost bureaucratic detail that mythological invention does not tend to produce. It generates lightning, it levels mountains, and it returns to Thor's hand after being thrown. No conventional material can resist it. It belongs by divine right to a single lineage. In ancient Greece, Hesiod's Theogony, written approximately 700 BCE, describes a thunderbolt of Zeus as manufactured by the Cyclopes in an underground workshop using a material that does not exist in the natural world as Hesiod knows it. It produces both light and concussive force simultaneously. It cannot be resisted by any god or mortal. It belongs to Zeus, and to Zeus alone. 3 weapons, 3 civilizations, 3 traditions, Vedic Indian, Norse Germanic, and Archaic Greek, that separated from their common ancestor in the migrations of the Proto-Indo-European peoples, somewhere between 6,000 and 4,000 BCE. 3 independently developed religious systems, 3 different cosmological frameworks, 3 different pantheons, and the same weapon with the same 7 operational characteristics: handheld scale, metal construction, manufactured rather than naturally occurring, light and force produced simultaneously, unconditional effectiveness against all materials, exclusive ownership by a single divine lineage, and an automatic return mechanism after deployment. The scholar who did the foundational work on this convergence was Georges Dumézil, whose academic career at the Collège de France spanned 5 decades. His Mythe et Épopée, published between 1968 and 1973, and his earlier work, The Destiny of the Warrior, established through structural, linguistic, and mythological analysis that these traditions are not independently invented parallel developments. They are phylogenetically related, descended from a single ancestor tradition. The way Latin, Sanskrit, and Old Norse are all descended from Proto-Indo-European, the thunder weapon was not invented separately by Indians, Norse peoples, and Greeks. It was inherited by all of them from the same source culture. Calvert Watkins of Harvard University, in his 1995 work, How to Kill a Dragon, identifies the specific narrative formula: hero slays serpent with lightning weapon. as a reconstructed Proto-Indo-European story at least 6,000 years old, predating any of the individual cultural traditions that preserve it. The story is older than the civilizations that tell it, and then it gets stranger. The Yoruba thunder deity, Shango from West Africa, carries a handheld thunder weapon with identical operational characteristics. Always returns, cannot be blocked, produces lightning. The Aztec storm deity, Tlaloc, does the same. Neither the Yoruba nor the Aztec traditions can be connected to the Proto-Indo-European lineage through any documented contact pathway. The 6,000-year-old inherited memory does not account for them. Something older would have to. The mainstream position, which follows Dumézil's structural method while rejecting its more speculative extensions, holds that the thunder weapon myth is a natural cognitive pattern. Thunder and lightning are the most terrifying natural phenomena in the human environment, and every culture that encounters them will anthropomorphize them as a divine weapon. The returning to hand property is narrative convenience. Heroes' weapons always come back because narratives about heroes require that they keep fighting. The manufacturing origin story is mythological depth, not technical documentation. This explanation is cogent and probably correct for most of what we see. But Dumézil's own analysis does not support independent invention. It supports shared inheritance. These traditions did not develop the thunder weapon separately. They received it from somewhere. The question that mainstream scholarship has not fully answered is what the original tradition was actually describing, and why the description is specific enough. The short handle of Mjolnir, the double head of the Vajra, the underground manufacture of Zeus's bolt, to suggest that whoever first told the story had seen something or held something that they did not have the vocabulary to explain in any language other than the language of gods. The most effective weapon suppression in history is not burning the archive. It is transforming the weapon into theology, placing it permanently in the hands of the divine, ensuring that no one looks for the machine because everyone already knows it belongs to God. 10 weapons, 10 civilizations, 10 suppressions. And sitting across all of them is a pattern that the mainstream explanations, entropy, secrecy failure, mythological evolution, can account for individually, but struggle to explain in aggregate. Greek fire died with the Callinicos family because an emperor wrapped it in divine mandate and made revealing it a sin against God. The Brahmastra was encoded in mythological language so that the technical content was preserved while the operational instructions were made inaccessible to anyone who didn't already know what they were reading. The Ark's engineering was embedded in religious law so completely that 3,000 years of theology never thought to look at the transport protocols as safety procedures. Archimedes' mirror vanished under the ash of a city Rome sacked specifically to kill the man who built it. The Qin Emperor's Mercury moat entombed its own architects as its final design feature. Kautilia's formulas barely survived one emperor's grief at Kalinga. Sparta never wrote it down and called the not writing a constitutional principle. Alexander burned the one Persian archive from which no translation was commissioned. Hannibal took the snake's name into a ring of poison and swallowed it rather than let Rome ask the question. And the thunder weapon became a god, placed permanently out of reach behind the authority of the divine, because that is the one vault that no general has ever successfully breached. The mainstream explanation says these are separate losses, different mechanisms, different eras, different causes, all producing the same outcome by coincidence. The alternative interpretation is that the pattern is the point, that powerful people across the ancient world arrived, independently or not, at the same conclusion. That some weapons were so far ahead of their context, so asymmetric in their destructive potential, that the responsible decision was not to deploy them more effectively, but to ensure that the next generation could not. That the most important military choice some of these civilizations ever made was the choice to forget. Most people walk through the ancient world, through its museums, its textbooks, its temple ruins, and see a record of what was made. You made it to the end of this list, which means you're more interested in what isn't there, in the gaps where the record stops exactly where it should be most complete, in the moments where the most meticulous historian of the ancient world writes and then does not elaborate. Those gaps are not accidents. They are decisions, and decisions have reasons. If this exploration of the secrets the ancients tried to bury has changed how you look at the ruins of the past, please subscribe and like this video. We are unearthing the history they fought to erase. Plant the seeds for the future. Our next archive of forgotten power will open soon.